So we're just going to say, can you come so you can be seen on the screen? So I just. Hi, this is Matt Meyer.
And I'm Attila Springer.
So we just want to say we've gone live, but we're gonna have the program start in about 5 minutes. And I think you've seen the program for today. It's a very special one. But we'll just say, as you wait for 5 minutes for the program to begin, that's special for us, of course, in addition to the extraordinary panelists and the extraordinary people we have here in Trinidad and Tobago for the IPRA conference. It's also a special day because it's the birthday of Minister Malcolm X, Hajj, Malik, Shabazz.
Yeah, very special person to so many of us all over Caribbean, the African diaspora. So, yeah, it's a wonderful day for us to be having this conversation because all of the topics that we're discussing today are very close to Brother Malcolm's heart.
Indeed, and of course, though he hasn't been mentioned as much at this conference and not connected to this day per se, but we're also talking about Kwame Ture, and
Absolutely.
Your family was also key to that person and that movement.
Yeah, I mean, as a child of the Black Power movement of Trinidad and Tobago, as a child of the Grenada Rebel, this, just calling the names of people like Kwame Ture, Maurice Bishop, and absolutely Malcolm X, because he is also a child of the Caribbean through his mother, Louise Nurse, who was from Grenada. It's really important for us to remember that so many people from the Caribbean contributed intellectually, radically, and through their bodies, putting their bodies on the line to build the cause of Pan-Africanism and to build the cause of human rights awareness amongst our people. And Caribbean remains that first point of encounter with globalization. And so, we are on the front line of so many things. We are on the front line of the current devastation that small island nation developing states are facing with climate change. We are on the front line of multiple forms of violence, visited on, especially on the bodies of young Black men. We're on the front line of a lot of things, that we are also on the front line of the conversation on reparations, starting with Rastafarians, starting with the Calypsonians, who have always creatively and culturally made those demands for us to remember that we need to be given what is our due. And we are still places like Haiti, and we can't have a conversation about the Caribbean without talking about Haiti and the chaos that is still visited on that island because of their audacity of demanding their freedom. So, today is an important day. It's so wonderful to have the people who we have here for this conversation.
We've been talking about having some of the people who are here today be here today for quite some time.
It's very exciting because it's like a year ago we were in New York for the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples with a delegation of Maroons. And certainly the question of marriage and how marriage is an answer to some of the things that we are dealing with as a region. That's also an important intervention that needs to be made in this space. And I actually met Mireille Fanon Mendes-France.
Yes.
And in fact, we went and we did an ancestral ritual at the monument to victims of the Atlantic slave trade with members of Suriname delegation, with Maroons from Trinidad, with Maroons from Dominica, etc. And at that point, I said to her, you know what, we need to get you to Trinidad for this peace conference that's happening. And I put thing into the universe, and it's so great to see it manifest here now. I'm very excited, and I feel a sense that our ancestors are really guiding these deliberations,
yes, as they do,
and guiding the
And-
energies that are gathered
And
here.
we have some powerful, powerful ancestors. We did the call, and it may be a little bit of an unusual call for the International Peace Research Association, but we did the call, and we cited Trinidadians, not for the sake of Trinidad, not for the sake of our locality. We're a global organization, but because of the global influence of George Padmore, of Claudia Jones, of C.L.R. James, of course, and Kwame Ture.
And Kwame Ture.
So the fact, also known as Stokely Carmichael, the fact of the matter is there's someone else who I really didn't think we were going to hear from on this level today, Attila Springer.
Oh.
So we're getting to hear Attila Springer, who was mentioned, if you watch really carefully at the opening ceremony, as the co-chair of the local organizing committee. And you then heard her a little bit going up and saying thank you to other people, but obviously a profound, profound teacher as well. And you remind me of something. As we are sending and receiving energy from the spirits and the ancestors, if you looked at the program carefully and you're a follower of IPRA, you may have noticed something that didn't happen last night, because our dear brother, who was a top leader of the New Jewel movement of Grenada, Don Rojas, at the very last moment has taken ill. So we send our prayers and we send our love to Don Rojas. And of course, to all of the people struggling for survival everywhere in the world today. Ashe. Let's take a moment to pause, wait a moment, and in about one, now it was 5 minutes ago. Now it's actually just 1 minute. Wait and pause, and we'll begin the program.
Coming just now.
Just now. You'll see the speakers gathering and chatting with each other. It's as if you're behind the scenes, except there's no scene to be behind. We need to move over now.
Is this okay? Do you think?
Yeah, no, don't do that at all.
Okay, folks. You may have guessed that the reason the music came off is because we are starting finally. Because of the number of speakers and some of the changes we've had to make, we don't really have a moderator or an MC. So we're going to ask for your patience and for their self-consciousness about that. But I will introduce them, and we're going to have one short piece before they begin speaking because of this special day. It is not a coincidence. Some of us have long since suggested that there are no real coincidences, but it's with some direct intentionality that this particular panel is happening on May 19th, which is not only the birthday of Ho Chi Minh of Vietnam, of some other noted leaders, some in the US that folks don't know as well, Lorraine Hansberry, but most notably of Minister Malcolm X el-Hajj, Malik el-Shabazz. So I'm going to introduce who each of these 5 people are, and then Attila Springer is going to say some things about Malcolm and do some things in commemoration of this day. It is such an honor, but also a thrill to have these 5 people here, in part because all of them are in one way or another connected to an effort that I was also centrally involved in. In October of 2021, after some years of work, where the Jihad and I and a few other people put together the Spirit of Mandela Coalition, which I've spoken about here. And it essentially came up with a construct, not a new one, that an international tribunal could be put together to look at issues of US human rights abuses. and that in continuity with the Bertrand Russell tribunals, in continuity with the We Charge Genocide that the founder of modern sociology, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Paul Robeson and others put forward over 70 years ago, with the calls for looking at the US in international terms that Malcolm X did with the Organization of Afro-American Unity. This tribunal took place. And this tribunal had 9 judges, 2 of whom were essentially prevented from coming into the country and participating in person, and the others participated in person. One of them that wasn't there in person is here today. The other 2 who were prevented from coming in are here and together for the first time today. And each of them are distinguished in their own rights. So I'll reintroduce, but Magdelene Moonsamy, Mireille Fanon, and Sherly Fabre were 3 of the 9 members of the panel of jurists in the International Tribunal. Jihad Abdulmumit was one of the organizers and gave testimony, and Luis Rosa was an advisor and assistant working with Oscar Lopez Rivera. So very quickly, I'll just say, we could take the entire 90 minutes saying who these 5 distinguished people are. But Mireille Fanon Mendes-France is, again, just Mireille alone, we could spend that 90 minutes. But she is the president of the Frantz Fanon Foundation, which operates out of Paris. She has been a member of many, many tribunals and jurists, maybe most notably as part of the United Nations Peoples of African Descent. She's a distinguished author and orator who's gone deeply in the legal and political issues of genocide and other issues. Jihad Abdulmumit was a young Black Panther who went on to become part of the Black Liberation Army and spent decades in prison for defending his people. He has come out as a Muslim activist and as a real coalition builder and leader of the Spirit of Mandela coalition. Luis Rosa Perez was also a former political prisoner. It's clear that an internationalist and a pan-Caribbean focus is here today. So as a continuing Puerto Rican human rights activist, Luis Rosa comes to us as a member of the National Puerto Rico Human Rights Network and Casa Corajera. Sherly Fabre is a Haitian activist who also represents currently at the United Nations the International Fellowship of Reconciliation. And finally, to say it correctly, her Honorable Magdelene Moonsamy is a former member of Parliament of South Africa. She is an appointed member of the High Court of South Africa, and she has standing also with the African Union. I forget the name of the African Union, the Valuative Body. And so you'll hear from the 5 of them in a moment, but welcome to this extraordinary panel on decolonizing our minds, redefining genocide and human rights. But first.
Thank you, Prof. Matt. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all. My name is Attila Springer. My father, after reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, decided that any child that he had, he would name after one of Malcolm's children. He didn't have he didn't have me until 1977. And as a child of Black Power, I always a bit resented having a name like Attila because it was not a regular African name, right? So I was surrounded by people who had beautiful African names, you know, and we were a sort of weird bunch of people in a society that was still very terrified, and we remain to today very terrified of many manifestations of our Africanness or Blackness. We're still very afraid. But as I grew older and as I myself read the works of Brother Malcolm, I began to feel more and more proud that I was named after Malcolm X's first daughter. Very rarely do people recognize that off the bat. And so today I'm here to simply pay tribute to some of the ancestors that have come from this region. And certainly Malcolm is by extension a product of this region via his mother, who was from Grenada, who was herself very radical. His father, who was a Garveyite, inspired by that great philosopher and organizer. This region has given the world some of its greatest and most fearless thinkers, believers in a better world. And I am just simply here to say I stand on their shoulders. I am proud to call myself Caribbean. I'm proud to be a member of the African diaspora. I'm proud to be named as a continuer of a tradition of resistance to colonialism in all its rotten forms that are found in our spaces, still very much manifesting in our fear of ourselves, in our fear of our Blackness, in our fear of our spirituality. So I pour a little water and ask for coolness, coolness, coolness. I ask for sweetness. I ask for gentleness. I ask for clarity. I ask for continuity. I ask that water continues to be the liquid that we use to remove every obstacle. Go up, whether up, down, or around. Let us continue to remove those obstacles through the clarity of our thoughts, the clarity of our intentions. Thank you so much. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.
Good afternoon. I am impressed to be on the panel with two former political prisoners. It is an honor for me to share this moment with both of you. As I'm not an English speaker, I wrote my paper, and I hope you will excuse me to read it and not to watch you when I am speaking. Sorry for that. Okay, what does mean decolonizing our minds in a world still going through the globalization of civilization system that has coloniality as its basis, where the continued unfolding of Western modernity is always the solidification and propagation of coloniality, foundation of Western modernity. In order to understand the concept of decolonizing our minds, which may seem like an injunction, I will take a detour to the ceremony of homage paid to Toussaint Louverture, who died in a French prison 120 years ago. It must be emphasized that paying tribute to this fighter is primarily a tribute to the Haitian people who fought out to free themselves from the dehumanization imposed by colonizers. The Foundation for the Memory of Slavery, set up by the current President of French Republic, organized a tribute to Toussaint Louverture at the beginning of April, presenting him as, I quote, a former slave who became a general of the Republic and then the leader of the largest French colony under the Revolution. This foundation was a surprising jump, worthy of meiosis, goes from what was imposed on millions of Africans to what is the pride and glory of the slave-owning and colonizing country, the individual success of the former enslaved person transcending his condition of merchandising. This change is considered as a recognition, but let's not be mistaken. It will be questioned as soon as the racialized person interrogates and criticizes the model of domination and tries to become an agent of transformation. This is what happened with Toussaint Louverture, to the point that the reason of his presence on French territory and the reason of his death in a prison in the Doubs region of France, where the treatment he received was aimed once again at dehumanizing him, will be passed over in silence during the tribute. A Jesuit modesty that wraps the crimes in the shroud of liberty, peace, pride, and fraternity in order to cleanse the Republic and guarantee the institutional criminal to reluctantly evoke the crimes and not to answer for them legally. This is the result of the instrumentalization of memory, the questioning of white supremacy and history. Thus, at opening another event to the Toussaint Louverture Day conference in Saint-Denis de la Réunion, where I was, we were able to hear in the same sentence, I quote from my memory, I quote, "We are celebrating this year the 220th anniversary of the death of Toussaint Louverture, but also the 338th anniversary of the publication of the Black Code." You know what is the Black Code is? A more than problematic comparison that amounts to put on the same level and without any critical apparatus an event and a tool, one concerning the fight against enslavement and the other recalling the monstrous instrument accepted as legal, which has governed for centuries the life of enslaved people, including that of Toussaint Louverture. Once again, the dominant aims to attenuate one event in relation to another, and even to change the nature of enslavement by giving it a legal character. But doing so, it is neither more nor less that referring, even unconsciously, Toussaint Louverture in his enslaved status. Is this not a subliminal way for France to clear itself from the crimes committed, from the dehumanization and indignity imposed on a whole people by enslavement and by imposition of an illegitimate debt at the price of its emancipation? Indeed, Haiti was obliged to compensate the colonial owners of enslaved people to the tune of $27 billion, actually. This recognition of debt, obtained under the threat of the cannon of Baron de Maco and his 15 ships in front of the city of Port-au-Prince during two weeks, and it is underlined in the collective work, Les chaînes de la dette, is a paradox. The conqueror receiving an indemnity from the defeated. Normally, it is the inverse. This compensation was legalized a few years later by the abolition decree in France in 1848, with its Article 5 authorizing the compensation of the owner and those enslaved for the same reason. This decision to reward the criminals who are taken up in many other countries. One would have accepted a little more courage and ambition, especially when one claims to honor the memory of the one who twice was deprived of his dignity by the colonizing state, and that, moreover, the UN General Assembly, by Resolution 2625 on the right to resistance, offered France, a permanent member of the Security Council, the opportunity to recognize that Toussaint Louverture, through his struggle, has been one of the precursors of the right to resistance, a principle of equal rights of people. The country will not go so far. If in 21 France accepts by law to recognize that the enslavement is a crime against humanity, for all that, at the time of the vote of this law, its opponent fought so that the article giving to the Afro-descendants the possibility to sue for crimes against humanity was removed. Audacity and courage are not the prerogative of former colonial state and still colonial. France currently maintains under its colonial order more than 11 countries. Looking history in the face would force them to assume the crimes committed, to change the paradigm of racializing dominization and that of the liberal capitalist model in which the hierarchization and mercantilization of body hold a central place. I would add that the President of the Republic, at the beginning of May, also paid another tribute to Toussaint Louverture by specifying in his first sentence that he was, I quote, a slave and a French man, freed by the Enlightenment, unquote. He forgot that Toussaint Louverture's nationality was Beninese, and that the slave only acquired the nationality of the country in which they were held at the time of abolition. Another lie showing that we are far from finished with the ideology of Eurocentric modernity. Thus, Toussaint Louverture would have become a French hero by what horrible trick the dominant are ready to make dream of greatness, its ignore and humiliated people. I say that because it was at the time of the fight against the reform of retirement. And as the government was really down after the demonstration in the street, and the long demonstration, they tried with this tribute, they tried to renovate their strongness. After gaining independence in 1804 and declaring itself the first Black Republic, which Toussaint Louverture did not see, the Haitian people found having to deal with the multiple consequences of enslavement, in particular within Haitian society. The ideology of white supremacy put in place by the colonizer, identified by Charles Mills as, I quote, the political system which, without ever being named, has made the modern world what it is, unquote. This hierarchy, in addition to being lived between black and white, was manifested among Haitians since the colonizer. On the plantation, as divided the enslaved into two groups. In one, the bossal who ride on board the slave ship, deprived of their humanity and dignity. And in the other, the Creole enslaved born on the plantation used domesticity and to the supervision of the bossal. By linking the black color to servitude and the white to freedom, the colonial power has de facto installed an epistemological and ontological rupture between Haitians. Thus, little by little, the colonial class created, through the invention of color prejudice, a segregation that has never ceased to organize Haitian society, a segregation that is found in many Afro-Caribbean society and their diaspora, but also between Africans and Afro-descendants. In addition, since the installation of the first Black Republic, the Haitian people identified by their revolution of liberation and reclaiming their dignity had to face battle between the South, where the colonizer lived, spearheading the army of occupation, and the North, where the Creole and bossal were gathered. Nevertheless, the country found a way to challenge the plantation economy, both in terms of ownership and exploitation, by asserting its right to self-determination and sovereignty. Does not this questioning of the imposed development model prefigure the right to permanent sovereignty over natural resources? I made reference to one UN resolution which underlines the importance for people to be able to exercise the right on the natural resources in the interest of national development and the well-being of the population. Haiti's fate was sealed, its debt was growing, poverty was increasing, the people were drifting, and the government, held by a few representatives of the petty bourgeoisie, has sold out to the capitalist system, thinking it would benefit from having handed the country over to the financier. Thus, successive structural crises have emerged with which the Haitian people must live. The will of France to prevent the autonomous economic and social development of Haiti announced what will be put in place in the French West Indies and other colonies to force them to remain in an unprofitable economy with no future, placing them de facto under the dependence of the metropole. It thus refused the colonial power, It thus refused to put in place process that would allow for true economic autonomy which would respect France's international obligation to sustainable development, just as it feels Haiti's emancipatory influence. It feels that autonomous economic success will become a pretext for asserting the right to greater political autonomy and to full sovereignty. Any hint of independence was subject to repression, imprisonment, and deportation. This colonial doctrine has also been tried and tested through the African continent. It will be, in a way, the next step for this continent with the establishment of a continental free trade that the IMF and the UN welcome, specifying that intercontinental trade will be improved. Will we know exactly what will be happen for Africa with this zone of free trade? It has to put in place in some months or years, not very far. The crisis can also provide to the empires some means of pressure on other Caribbean states tempted to follow the example of Brazil, Chile, or Colombia. It also gives the right to dream of adding after Puerto Rico a new star to their flag. Meanwhile, the courageous Haitian people fighting for their sovereignty, suffocating under structural crisis, are meeting, proposing to work on alternatives like the Montana Accords to break with the hell of violence that is breaking even more Haitian society. The situation of Haiti refers to performative a priori that are the demonstration of a decadent colonial attitude that tends to express itself through multiple forms of evasion and bad faith, where the norm of reason constantly changes in an effort to render the question about colonialism and decolonization irrelevant. Is Haiti being unconsciously punished to be the first Black Republic? Is the country still a danger to white supremacy? What does mean the near silence of Afro-descendants and Africans in the face of the situation in Haiti, and particularly when a lot of them are claiming for Pan-Africanism? Is it clear, however, that what is happening to Haitians says something about about the situation of African and African descent? It is in the same way that the African independence, born in blood and tears, is being trampled by the liberal financial system and transnational. It also underlines the fact that structural racism is still present in all the injustice of the dominant system based on white supremacy that keeps denying the dignity of African and Afro-descendants. One question, as Haiti crossed over to the other side of the reality, the international community looks on, closes its eyes, it's alarmed at times, but chooses not to answer the only question that would allow the Haitian people to get out of this structural crisis. The total and immediate cancellation of the foreign public debt, the abandonment of liberal economic policy, while demanding the repayment of the illegal debt and interest paid by Haiti to France, as well as the return of the $500,000 constituting the gold reserve stolen from the National Bank of the Republic of Haiti in December 1914 by Americans. To conclude, I would say that the reason why this period of discovery through conquest has such a massive and paradigmatic character is that it represents not only a demographic catastrophe, but also a metaphysical catastrophe. By this, I mean that the revolution that was the discovery of the America resulted in a collapse of the edifice of intersubjectivity, alterity, and a distortion of the meaning of humanity. This metaphysical catastrophe is at the heart of the transformation of epistemology, ontology, and ethics that founds modernity, coloniality, and the modern European science. The fact that metaphysical catastrophe is linked to Western civilization and war and leads to the naturalization of war explains why the colonial condition of modernity resembles a zone of perpetual warfare where extreme violence and constant low-level violence are continually directed against the colonized population and those identified as their descendants. If we want to talk about peace and resilience, we have to take into account all the causes and consequences of the crisis in which we all live, with more or less variation. We also have to sort out the problem and to avoid a genocide, whether it be cultural or political, in the sense that Lemkin is a jurist who worked on the notion of genocide, and the definition of genocide used by the UN is not exactly what Lemkin suggests. And the suggestion of Lemkin is more large and more useful for ourselves when we work on reparation, for example, because he mentioned it's not only something planned, systematic, and blah, blah, blah. It's also against a group, cultural, political group. And it could help us to use this. It is what I suggest for the Tribunal on Genocide, because it's something very useful. Okay, whether it be cultural or political, in the sense that Lemkin define it, or murderous as it occurs in certain countries. It is urgent to work on the convergence of struggles, on international solidarity, and on the importance of defining the meaning of the fights against an enemy that is years ahead of us and that has incommensurable means. This obliges to be clear on the terms of the commitment and not to be satisfied with analyses that would only take into account the aspect of colonialism or neo-colonialism. One must understand what is at stake, that the dominant ones manifest coloniality of power when they decide to use partition for a country, or to, I was thinking to Sudan, or to abandon others to illegal sanction, or to call a country or a group terrorist, or to decide that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It comes from a long way of ruling over bodies, especially black bodies and minds. It comes from the hierarchy of race. The paradigm are the same. It is this ideology of domination that is our common enemy, as it is exercised and perfected against people. Social movement, group activists, and whistleblowers. Thank you.
Hope you don't mind if I stand. What I have to say would be unbefitting to be sitting. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ثم حتى النصر. I seek refuge in Allah from Shaitan the accursed. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, all praise be to Allah. Peace and blessings be upon his last messenger and prophet, Muhammad, his family and companions, all of them together. And we struggle into victory. Again, my name is Jihad Abdulmumit. I'm formerly a member of the Black Panther Party for the United States of America and went underground with the Black Liberation Army. I do not know how many of you may be familiar with the BLA, Black Liberation Army, but as of May 19, 2023, make a note that you are. A significant development in understanding of what happens in a place called the United States. So the discussion today, for the time that I have, deals with decolonizing our mind, redefining genocide and human rights. So before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge IPRA and all the organizers And top salute to everybody, the helpers. I want to acknowledge my comrade in arms, Luis Rosa, my esteemed colleagues here, and my beautiful, wonderful wife, Magdelene Moonsamy. So to the point, decolonizing our mind. So as my beautiful sister opened up honoring our Hajj Malik Shabazz, I'm going to reference our Black Shining Prince quite a few times in my brief presentation. How do you decolonize your mind? Well, Malcolm, as he was formerly known, had a saying about what we should not do, and kind of like making a humor of it. So he said, when the boss got sick, we say, what's the matter, boss? We sick? We sick. When the boss's house caught on fire, he'd run, get water, try to put out that fire more than the boss himself. You patronize the boss, the slave master, the oppressor. And the dreadful thing about it, in 2023, we still do that. So when we talk about decolonizing our mind, it may start with politicizing ourselves, rooting ourselves with a different outlook on life, rather than embellishing capitalist thought, rather than trying to imitate the slave master. So you say, well, I dress like Master Jones. So it's not that we're itemizing one thing, but when you start categorizing and cataloging a whole bunch of things, you ain't nothing but a colonized joke. One thing, okay, I got jeans too. I got some Reeboks, but I had them, they're upstairs. And when there's a whole lot of things, when it affects our thinking. You know, I often reference our beautiful sister, Harriet Tubman, which I'm sure many are familiar with, that orchestrated the Underground Railroad. You know, it said that she had liberated 313, give or take some. And she said that she could have liberated hundreds more if they only knew they were slaves. If you only knew that you were oppressed. If you only knew that your apathy and complacency and embellishment of capitalist goodies and trinkets and all the things that we have makes it easier for the empire, the United States, to oppress other countries around the world and to maintain the legacy of colonialism of other countries around the world. So decolonizing our mind begins with educating ourselves, as we're doing here, and as I'm sure everybody has been doing in the trajectory of your own life. I say, please continue to do that. Because you don't have to be on a soap opera like this here. But it could be at a Thanksgiving dinner, at breakfast, when you stop a misogynist joke, when you stop going along with the program, when you are able to intelligently counter reactionary remarks that bolster the empire. So as it has been mentioned by my dear comrade sister here and Matt, we had a tribunal a couple of years ago charging the United States government with genocide against Black, brown, and indigenous people. Genocide? Well, normally when you think about genocide, you think about something that can be really accurately quantified. It started here, it ended here. Here's the war criminals, and this is approximately how many people were killed, slaughtered, murdered, massacred. But when you talk about it in confines of the United States of America, those digits, those facts are there, but it's been going on so long that it's become normalized. It's been going on so long that we participate in our own genocide through our own ignorance, through our own colonized mind. So you see the connection there. We are willing participants. We are co-conspirators in our own death, our own destruction, through our own ignorance. And we have to break that cycle. And how do we break that cycle? We break it by standing up and fighting for our human rights. So now yesterday they were saying that it's not, it should stop saying nonviolence and start using the word resistance, because nonviolence kind of like stereotypes a certain type of thing. But you know that's not the case. It's not a type of thing. It wasn't the type of thing with Dr. Martin Luther King when they said nonviolence for people to stand in face of high-power water hoses being blown away, bones broken ribs, legs and everything, being shocked with electric cattle prods, being whipped, beat with batons, dogs sicked on them. Thank you, comrade. But just to amp it up a little bit and give it a little more context, we're talking about resistance. My comrade and I, my beautiful wife, come from different movements that may be a little more heavy duty than just resistance in the sense of the nonviolent way. So I'm going to tell you this right now. Those of us that's on the nonviolent thing, I salute you. Those of us that may go a little raw, a little more hard because of the circumstances, definitely salute you. Make sure we don't get in each other's way. Make sure that we are there to support one another. Do not let yourself become catified to snitch me out, to turn me in. Damn it, you better hide my ass if need be. Malcolm said, you know what? You want to advance your struggle, the first thing you have to do is you got to take all them Uncle Tom Negroes and put them on this side of the room. And you want to take all those sisters and brothers down the struggle, you put them on that side of the room. And your first line of opposition will be these Uncle Toms. The ones that are ass kickers, the bootlickers, to the oppressor that would turn you in. And you know it's true. Because as we talk right now, hundreds are being killed around the world. From Palestine to Western Sahara to every continent and every country in Africa and to the streets of Chicago, where they have us killing each other on the streets. A colonized mind where we hate each other's guts. They gutted us. They gutted our humanity. They took it away from us. We don't even understand we're coming and going. Don't get in each other's way. I can tell you that right now. Do we understand that? Can I get a thumbs up? Do we understand what I'm saying? Okay, kind of like in closing. So can the situation change throughout different forms of resistance in the United States? We'll see. But when it comes to armed struggle and that type of level of conflict, if you want to, the opportunity to try your best to avoid it is to make sure that what we're doing right here matters. Because you don't want to be slow, lame, disconnected, uncommitted, and then we reach a point that we have no choice but to fight. And oftentimes when we have no choice but to fight like that, we are so at odds that winning is very difficult. Winning is very difficult. And history proves that it may be impossible. As you can count through all the societies or filling the dustbins of history. Can the American society change? Malcolm again said a chicken cannot produce a duck egg. You got that? A chicken cannot produce a duck egg because the system itself wasn't designed to produce a duck egg. It just can't do it. It's impossible. It is impossible for this American system to produce freedom, justice, and equality and liberation for Black, brown, and indigenous people. Its system is not designed to do that. And Malcolm went on to say that if ever a chicken did do that, you can bet your $1,000 that it's a revolutionary chicken. It's a revolutionary chicken. So I'm going to quote Bob Marley. Unto the philosophy that says one race is superior and another inferior is permanently and finally discredited and abandoned. Then is war. Then is war. War in the East. War in the West. Everywhere there's war. And if you want to avoid that reality, then I close with saying this, sisters and brothers, that you want to make sure that everything that we're doing right now matters. Otherwise, warm up your TE. I'd like to close as I began, praising Allah, as a Muslim, however you relate to your higher being, yourself, by saying Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Thank you so very much. Assalamu alaikum, all power to the people.
I don't know how to follow that. Surely you won't hear my voice up there. But my spirit is flying that high. Thank you, comrade. Thank you, man, all my comrades. Thank you for being present. Thank the organizers for this event. It's much needed. It's much appreciated. We were meant to disappear, but because we are here, we're already victorious.
Yes.
But we must continue to be here. I come from a country that's very violent. It's a country that has been colonized now for over 525 years. 400 by Spain and 120 by the leaders of democracy, by those policemen of the world, the United States of America. And when I say we were meant to disappear, I mean exactly that, because colonization, its aim is to destroy the nation, to exterminate the nation, and exterminate it by penetrating every sense of our humanity, every sense of our society, every institution, every aspect. Our food is controlled, our churches are controlled, our politics are controlled, our workspace, everything in economy is being controlled by the colonizer. We have faced this reality now from the United States for over 125 years. Every decade since, there's been resistance and there's been political prisoners in every decade of that realization, of that reality. Like Haiti, right now we are being forced to pay a debt that is not ours. Puerto Rico has been in debt now for many years because obviously, unlike Haiti, we have corrupt politicians who take as much loans as possible. Some go in their pockets, and others go into projects that mean nothing in terms of the people. There's still pipelines laying in the ground in the western part of Puerto Rico that were meant for a pipeline for natural gas that ecologists said will end up blowing up the island. So it was stopped. But the pipelines are there and billions of dollars were spent. There's a company that was established recently, Lumos. If Lumos tries to come into Trinidad or any of your countries, stop them. It's a company that was just made just after the disaster of Puerto Rico, after Hurricane Maria tore down our electrical grid. It was formed with a company from Canada, especially to gut out and to steal basically some of the resources and some of the money that was destined for the electrical grid of Puerto Rico. There's electrical outages every day in Puerto Rico. Hospitals there's electricity in hospitals are turned off. Now they're doing this systematic where they take from one area and put it to the other, and you have no electricity for 2 days. Every household in Puerto Rico has had an appliance that has been damaged because of either surges or outages. And this company is getting billions of dollars, and they did not have to invest anything. This is the type of new colonization that's occurring in Puerto Rico. And occurring worldwide, because I say Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico has strategically and historically been used as an experimental point for the rest of the world. Neoliberalism, everything has started in Puerto Rico. Even counterintelligence programs and many fields were started in the United States, was first started against the nationalist parties in the 30s. So Puerto Rico has been a direct colony of the United States, is the experimental ground. Uranium-235 was tested on our ground. Agent Orange was tested on us. The first birth control pill, resulting in 33% of the Puerto Rican women being sterilized, was used in Puerto Rico. Contraceptive programs. We've had torturous methods that were used in the School of the Americas were tested on resistance fighters of Puerto Rico. So when I say that these things are being implemented in Puerto Rico, be careful because they'll soon be at your neighborhood. They'll soon be in theaters nearby. Because that's how this colonizer works. This colonizer works to seep into every, like I said, every aspect of your society. Right now, in our island, and I'm jumping around because I'm throwing these statistics as they come in my head. Right now in Puerto Rico, we consume 80%, 85% of the food we have a food dependency. How can a tropical island like Trinidad, where you can drop a seed anywhere and grow anything you want, how can we be food dependent?
Okay.
There's got to be a systematic plan for this. How can a people who is very educated in both languages, including the language of the colonizer, be underemployed, unemployed to over 34% unemployment? There's over 65% of the people under the poverty level. We have a birth rate of less than 1%. If this isn't genocide, what is? We're being not only displaced. There's over 250,000 Puerto Ricans have been displaced out of Puerto Rico in the last 4 or 5 years. As a result, we got 5 million Puerto Ricans living in the United States and 2.7 or 2.8 living in Puerto Rico. Now, I'm going to prove to you that this is systematic because in 1978, one of the revolutionary groups in Puerto Rico penetrated a military base and stole a document that was the 2020 plan. The 2020 plan basically outlined what Puerto Rico would look like in the decade, in the 2020s, right? It called for the depopulation of the island to make it easier to control. It called for the strip mining of the center of the island. It called for major roads to be built so that the center of the island can be strip mined with large machines, tractors and stuff. It called for a pipeline, a water pipeline to serve the 11 industrial parks that will be created around the island that can easily be turned into chemical warfare if they need it. What happened? As a result of discovering this, at that time there was 5 guerrilla organizations operating in Puerto Rico and one in the United States. We launched attacks against these installations, those dams that were being built for the chemicals that were needed for strip mining. They found 45% of the copper that the military needs, the U.S. military needs for their military hardware, they found it in the center of the island. So they came and they cut a tip of the mountain off and drilled all the way down and discovered this copper. Anyway, we managed to stop. We thought we would stop that we had stopped this 2020 plan. But the roads were constructed, the pipeline was constructed, the water pipeline was constructed, 11 industrial parks were constructed, and the island is being depopulated. So what's next? And when you have depopulation, usually the first people that migrate are people from the inner country, because there's no jobs out there. There's less resources going into those municipalities, and it's easier for a speculator to come in and say, you got this land that you're not using, let me give you $200,000 for it. As a result, over 3,000 farms were sold like that, and this land is now ready to be exploited. Offshore, you have the same thing with magnesium, offshore magnesium and other minerals that's being found in Puerto Rico. And it makes it easier. There's euphemisms that are given to us that we swallow every day to make it easier for colonizations to exist. And what the comrade was pointing out, sometimes we don't know we're enslaved. And sometimes the solution of the colonizer seems like the best solution. They tested 99 wells and found that there were 100 wells that found 99 contaminated. They said, oh, we're going to build you a water pipeline to bring you fresh water. They didn't tell us that they was for the 11 industrial parks. And at the same time, you have neighborhoods that sometimes lack a little paint and lack a little repair. They say, oh, those dilapidated buildings, we're we're gonna bring in private investors to come in. Next thing you know, there's 3,000 Airbnbs being sold. Oh, you want cell phones and you want better communication? We got towers. Puerto Rico's right now proliferated with so many electrical communication towers that we're being microwaved. We have the largest rate of cancer in the world, that little island. So again, I say this and don't keep it in the context of Puerto Rico, because this is happening in our community. This is happening in every colonized community, including the internal communities of the United States. There's food dependency. I work sometimes in Chicago, and we started a project because there was nowhere where you can buy fresh food, vegetables and fruit. Everything was either canned or travel for weeks and no good. So we started our own little thing. Next thing you know, a supermarket came to me and said, "Hey, I like the project. I like this thing. Can we buy it from you?" I said, "No, it's not for sale, but I can do a low lot. I'll keep the same concept. I'll bring this and that." And the people I was working for ended up selling it. You know what he used it for? For storage. He kept it closed all the time in storage. So now we lost that. We were duped into, and this is our fault for falling into these ventures. When a speculator comes to your house that you paid $120,000 for and say, here's a $450,000 check. You can buy something real nice over there. And you give it away, what happens? You have begun to destroy your community. And your community took ages, decades to build. And when you start destroying your community, those roots are being destroyed as well. And again, I say this is happening everywhere. This will come to your town. They want places where they can golf. They want places where they can sit in the sun. And what better places than Trinidad, Puerto Rico, Grenada, Cuba. And that's why they're so hard on Cuba, because Cuba is resistant and stands as an example for the rest of us. But they're coming after them as well. They're coming after Haiti. You think Haiti, the first nation to be liberated in Americas, and with the resources they have, that they should be in the condition they're in? You don't think there's an outside hand maneuvering these things? Not being able to get a loan and be careful of those loans too, because the IMF is crazy about giving out loans to corrupt politicians, right? So all in all, what I'm saying is these are agents of genocide. Our work, like the comrade said, is to be ever vigilant, we don't have to be pacifists to be nonviolent. We have to confront. And those confrontations sometimes are painful. We have to confront, we have to be in their faces. And if you don't want, because I don't want it, to get to the stage where armed revolutionary violence meets repressive violence, then we have to do the work. I'm here to learn from you how I can better that work. So basically that's it. Again, we were meant to be disappeared, and because we are here, we have already won. Thank you.
So hard to be third. Thank you guys so much. So I want to just build on what my comrades have spoken on. So I'm from Haiti, and so I'm going to give you a lot of my context from. I'm going to take this. Praise be to God.
Yes, better.
I know. Yeah, so I'm going to give you the context from Haiti, but it can actually be applied like everywhere, like a lot of what we're talking about. So I want to talk to you about misinformation and how misinformation is used to dehumanize people and also blame them for their situation, right? I was born in Haiti, but I grew up in the United States. And when I was growing up, I felt a lot of shame around Haiti because all you ever heard about was like the poverty in Haiti and the situation and like why couldn't Haiti get itself together? And then when I grew up and I learned all that was happening to Haiti, I was just like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, how could it not get itself together? When was it ever allowed to get itself together? Like, from the onset, you know what I mean? We won our revolution, and people fought hard. And not only fought hard, but I wanted to be understood that France was like a colonial power. They were a superpower. They're still a superpower, right? And Haiti was a bunch of formerly enslaved people who came together and decided that they weren't going to take this anymore and formed the militias and not only formed maroon communities that went into the mountains, but they organized each other. They organized themselves, and the men that the men that knew how to fight fought, and the women that knew about like plant medicine and how to heal people. Like everybody came together to fight, and we beat France. Also England, right? And then later on, the U.S. would come, and we fought them too. So Haiti has, ever since it's become independent, has just been fighting to maintain that independence, right? So when Donald Trump first came into office, he made that SO comment, sorry, children, countries comment, right? But we never like take a deep dive into how these countries like got to be that way. But also we never take a deep dive into understanding why the narrative is this way, right? So somebody once said Haiti is the only country in the Caribbean that has the only country in the world that has the last name of the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, right? Whenever the West mentions Haiti, they say, oh, Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, right? And so why is that? Well, in 1804, when we became the first Black Republic, we were the only nation that had a successful slave revolt. And not only that, but the formerly enslaved defeated Napoleon's army, which was considered like one of the strongest armies. So it was a decisive blow, not only to France, but to the entire system of slavery. And immediately, our ancestors became a threat for the existing world power. And I think just like my brother pointed out, Cuba becoming like the current threat for the existing world power, because people can say what they want about Cuba, but Cuba's actually doing great, right? Like for all being under embargo for all these years, they're actually doing extremely well. And that is it goes against what we're taught, right, about them or where they should be. So what happens is that it's very easy to kind of, when we see acts of violence, it's very easy to point that out and to say like this is wrong. Well, most of the time, it's very easy to point that out and say this is wrong. But sometimes the narrative gets twisted so that you don't feel the empathy that you should feel for people. For instance, just recently in the United States, a man by the name of Jordan Neely got murdered in the subway. He was not bothering anybody. He was just saying that he was hungry, and he was yelling about that. But he wasn't hitting anybody, he wasn't doing anything. And this man snuck up behind him, put him in a chokehold, and killed him. And the thing is, people started making excuses for the white man that murdered him. And the man was in the Marines, and the Marines came out and said, no, this is murder, because he's a trained, like, Marine, right? And so you know that if you keep somebody in a chokehold for this long, that they're going to die, right? But all of the people that came out, and not only did they come out and speak up and defend the guy that murdered Jordan, but they also raised about $1 million for his defense, whereas Jordan's family, $2 million, thank you, $2 million for his defense, whereas Jordan's family have not received a fraction of that for his funeral, right? So this whole dehumanizing process really works to, when we talk about how we can decolonize our minds and how it works into genocide. But like my brother pointed out, the genocide with the US and with just colonialism has been slow, because they understand now when you have a genocide like what happened with the Holocaust, people will speak out and there'll be like calls to action and calls to reparations. But when you have like a slower genocide, it's harder for people to pinpoint, right? But also, I just want to say, even when you think of the Holocaust, or when you think of the Rwandan genocide, right? It didn't start off with gas chambers. It didn't start off with like ethnic cleansing of a group. It started off with like dehumanizing people. We have to get our society to the point where some people's lives don't matter, and so we can then just get rid of them, right? Or we can blame them for their situation. So right now, Haiti is in a situation where there's so much upheaval, and people, the rhetoric around it is how the Haitians aren't doing anything, or how there's all this problem that is blamed on Haiti. But let's look at what's happening. So you have armed gangs in Haiti right now. Let's take that. Haiti has no weapons manufacturers, right? We don't even have an army because the US, after they invaded us in 1915, took away America's army. My sister talked about the gold that was taken. It was not just taken from Haiti, from the US. It was a multinational Citibank that talked the US into taking it. And you still have other multinationals that are in Haiti right now, taking just, when Obama was president and what's her name, Hillary was Secretary of State, she coerced the president of Haiti and the government of Haiti to not raise the Haitian minimum wage. The minimum wage wasn't even $5 American, but because Levi, Disney, and a few other companies did not want the minimum raise, she forced the Haitian government not to do it, right? So we don't even manufacture our own things. Like my brother was saying, we used to grow rice. When Haiti was a colony of France, I'm sorry to be when Haiti was a colony of France, it was one of the richest colonies because of rice, because of sugar, because of coffee. We don't grow any of these things anymore because now they're imported from the US, and that is because of Bill Clinton. So the Clintons have done a horrible, horrible job to Haiti. But now you have a situation where, like I said, we don't have our own weapons, right? So we don't even have our own army to say that these weapons came from the army. So these weapons are coming in from the United States that's controlling our seaboards, right? They're coming in, and you have children who, the young adults now are the children that were there after the earthquake, who survived the earthquake and who had all that trauma, had no access to aid, had no access to mental health, right? And then you give these children guns without giving them anything else, and then you wonder why the situation is the way it is, right? And so all of that is taken out of the conversation, or even worse, when it's put in a coercive way. So the US or other countries will say, well, Haiti got so much money during the Haitian Revolution, right? I'm sorry, after the earthquake. Let's talk about money. So there's this thing called Tide Aid, TIED, where it goes like this. So let's say you're a country and you want some money to build a bridge, and I'm like the US or the IMF. I say to you, well, you asked me for $5, we'll keep the numbers low. You asked me for $5, but I'm gonna give you 10. You have to take the whole 10. So this sounds like, well, you have $5 extra, right? You do not. From that $10, 8 of them you have to use from companies from my country. So even if you were gonna get it cheaper somewhere else, even if you were gonna get it from the same price from your own people, you have to now use my people. Also, if your country, like my country, has gold, right? Guess who's mining the gold in Haiti? The US and Canada. Guess what they did? Canada had this system where they came in and there's poor farmers on the land. And they told them that we'll give you food if you let us mine this area. So first of all, why are you talking to the farmers instead of talking to the government, right? You're going around them. And then why are you having a food program come in first to kind of like bait people into giving you their things? And then when the people still didn't want to give up their resources, they were like, we'd rather starve, then they found other ways to like cleanse you out, right? So anyway, let's say even if it was fair, right? Let's say it was fairly mined gold. But guess who makes the price of gold? not Haiti, not any of the countries in Africa that have the most gold. The price of gold is set on Wall Street and in London. So as the US, if I wanted to come in, or Canada, if I wanted to come in and say, I'm gonna give you this $10, I could just spend a few months before that lowering the price of gold. So now it takes you more gold to give me back the $10 you owe me. On top of that, you still owe me interest of that $10. So $8 of that business is going to our business. You owe me interest of all 10, and the only thing that you have to be able to pay me back is your raw resources, and I control that market, right? So when people talk about, a lot of times when I'm online or something and I'm speaking against what's going on, and people are like, well, we give Haiti aid, we shouldn't give them aid. I'm like, don't give us aid. Like, we actually don't want it, because and then, like my brother said, it doesn't even go to the people, because there was a petition in the UN for them to have a law that says that if you give a country $10, that country has to show how they used it, right? The US vetoed it. I wonder why. Because you want to be able to give it to your dictators to do whatever they want. So even if the idea is, that you're supposed to spend, this money here, we all know that it's not going to be spent there, right? But anyway, my time is running out, so I'm sorry. But I just wanted to just talk about how this misinformation, like, aids in dehumanizing people. And there are times where people feel like what they're saying is actually true or like based on something, but they just don't understand how the system works. And I think now with social media and this rise of like everybody being an expert in everything, it makes it extremely dangerous. And it's really, I feel like this is a front that we, as people who fight for justice, have to really like understand that fighting for this is not only just feeling irritated that the information is wrong, but that this is being used systematically to dehumanize us, and that dehumanization then leads to other acts of violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody need a body break? No? Okay, I was just checking because we've been just, hey, there you are. Because we are doing non-trauma, right? We are part of this is also part of dealing with trauma. I want to be very humble, sit amongst my very distinguished colleagues. Well, I don't know if it's colleagues. You're not colleagues. You're obviously way exaggerated in the business than I am. We've got, I'm very humbled, I must say that. But I want to just say, in the 1900s, Sylvester Williams called for, let me acknowledge my husband. This can be a problem if you don't. When your husband acknowledges you and you don't acknowledge him. So in the 1900s, Sylvester Williams, who was then, I think, an Indian, but obviously of alternative origin, Indies origin, called for the first Pan-African meeting in London. And it was a meeting for the purposes of peace after the 1884 split, the sharing of the Berlin Conference. Now, what happens? World War I. Here, after the splitting of the continent, and the Pan-Africanists come together, say, how do we find ourselves in a society that has been taken over? Are then faced with war. We all love peace, but let us understand. Tolstoy, one of the biggest issues of Tolstoy was his wife, Annie. He was miserable because his wife actually was frustrated by the fact that he was surrounded by people who tried to destroy the very understanding of what a societal development project meant. Now, there comes the end of the war. And the Pan-Africanists meet again 1919 in Versailles for a peace conference after war. The solution, and let me stand, or maybe let me rather sit, because then I'm going to end up becoming very demonstrative. The solution to the decolonization is Pan-Africanism. Let's understand. Those who understand the concept that is against oppression, aggression, and hate of other peoples is one who will understand unity in diversity in the continent and in the diaspora. That's the first strategy. And when I speak about decolonization of the minds, it takes me back to what were the ideals of the United States of Africa that were then shipped in or shipped out through the African Union, of which I blame my own president, former President Thabo Mbeki. And what then happened to the very individuals who were calling for the United States of Africa, for what reason? Was it to undermine sovereignty of states? It was to unify the continent in terms of its economic integrity and its ability to stand as a continent which is rich. When we speak about decolonizing the mind, we don't start with the mind, we start with the resources, because the colonizer does not want to colonize your mind, wants to colonize what you have under your feet, in your blue economy, and on the ground. And if that means human capital in the form of slavery, and if that means agriculture, if that means fish, if that means everything that surrounds it, in a desert like the Western Sahara, phosphate and fisheries is the reason that Morocco is now at war with the Western Sahara. So that colonizer first wants your capital value. And if that means oppressing your mind as a consequence of capturing your capital value, that's the consequence of colonizing. And decolonizing means, and I think my comrade Louis says so, decolonizing means protecting by all means and forces that which is for the purposes of your development and growth. So when we went from a United States of Africa project from the OAU, and then obviously, there was a project to kill Gaddafi, we understood that it was like a long COVID, the aftermath of a Dutch disease. The Dutch disease is what they called it. Colonization, the Dutch disease. So yet we remain slaves, not because we are uneducated, but we don't have the means to educate ourselves, because the capital to those means have been extorted. Is that the right word? No, they have been forcefully detached from ourselves. And the other aspect of colonization is, for me, this is very sensitive, is patriarchy. I'm going to tell you, colonization is not simply an act that requires possession. It requires possession through trauma. This is why you have the consequences of anger, which we assume is a result of oppression, which may be correct directly or indirectly, but it comes as an act of forceful takeover. It is war by its very nature. We want to sit peacefully and have a discussion about war. I'm just asking the question. I've never negotiated with a terrorist. So how do we find the relevant strategies in terms of colonization? When the United Nations reprimands 17 African countries, my sister, for not rejecting or not conforming to the neutrality around the Ukraine, Russia. Why are we not speaking about the fact that the same instruments that were designed after World War II to establish peace, to establish any kind of aggression, anti-aggression, or no future wars, dispatches a whole illegitimate NATO to go and create colonization of which we are silent about because this is a 20-year plan that we're not speaking about. And when we sit here and we start to want to unravel the concept of decolonization, we want to unravel the issue of genocide, we want to unravel the issue of human rights. What is the difference with peace and justice? It's massive. Justice doesn't mean peace. Justice is what the United States justifies by saying, do not associate with Putin. It's what it says to South Africa, do not allow so-and-so into your country, but yet it forces itself by its very nature into the Western Sahara. It refuses peace troops through the African Union, through the oppression of France, where 14 countries, Francophone countries, want to remove themselves from any association with France. It forces itself through the Commonwealth into every shore that it wants to. And why now? Why now are we wanting to negotiate peace with terrorists? The issue of decolonization is very important of the mind because it is built structurally. Look at apartheid South Africa. We were living in Bantustanis. The same with what is happening, the project of Morocco's autonomy plan in the Western Sahara. The same with the walls, the barren in the Western Sahara along the boundary line, which is infested with landmines. The walls in Palestine. What is that? That is structural, deliberate oppression, which is created premeditatively with the intention of separating its people from its people, against its people from each other for the oppressor, which is what Jihad speaks about when he says, you stand on this side of the road, or you stand on that side of the road, but yet we have people who come through and say we live side by side. Unless you're not in exile, fight for where you are and for your self-determination and your autonomy. The historical consequences of such projects, I mean, Brother Luis speaks about the more than 500 years of colonization of Puerto Rico. You look at South African history, and you look at Palestinian history, you look at the Western Sahara, you look at all 17 countries that still remain non-self-governing states. And we want to ask ourselves about the misvalues of societal degeneration utilizing spatial geographic distribution as a means of policing. Now I'm going into genocide, police brutality, which is part of the 5 charges that we charge the United States government with. Environmental racism, mass incarceration, public health inequities, political prisoners and prisoners of war. And so we want to know, what is genocide? Genocide is the killing in a month of more than 100 Palestinian people by the Israeli government. Genocide is the killing of, in the 1970s, of young people who took to the streets in the likes of Hector Peterson in South Africa, who were killed by apartheid police. That is genocide. Who derived the term genocide? Ralph, what is his name? Let me find Ralph's surname. Now we must just look for Ralph. I think it was in the 19... Ralph was Polish, so he defined genocide in the 1944. And he defined genocide because he felt the authority to accumulate the Greek and the Latin language and define for us what must be a mass killing. Lemkin, yes, Lemkin. Yes, Lemkin. Yes, I forgot, it was just too much. But just for, so now we must, I don't know, is he around? No, he's not.
He's around.
It's a moving target. But Lemkin decided to define genocide. Now, what do we do? You know, I wrote a paper on democracy. Another panel, okay, fine. Okay, here you are, guys. Let's talk about it. We have an opinion, let's share. I'm not embarrassing you, I'm really saying.
We were just saying.
Okay, I want to hear because I want somebody else to stop me where I'm just tipping over the edge. So I'm saying, like, you know, this is about participation. It's not about me having the ideas that I'm enforcing. But this is the thing, there's Lemkin, he's a moving target if he's alive. He decides to identify genocide as being mass incarceration, and obviously an act of killing people. Now in Swahili, if we have to take Lemkin's definition, we understand it extends to the issue of annihilation, mass incarceration, and this is because we're speaking about genocide in terms of what? Of Rwanda. We're not speaking about the genocide that has happened all over the world, where you don't need to see genocide or police brutality, or even the fact in the United States that one little kid decides to take his father's pistol and take out a whole classroom of kids. That's genocide. And that's racism. That is oppression. So we need to understand that when we're talking about an understanding and deconstructing the issues of, I mean, you take a political prisoner and a prisoner of war. And we don't want to speak about the genocide of what happens in Morocco when Morocco refuses legal representation to prisoners of war, to political prisoners, and let alone have them languish in hunger strikes. This is happening globally. And this is genocide. But do we accuse? No, what do we say instead? Let there be a referendum. Who makes the decision on that referendum? That decision of the referendum comes from the same United Nations, which is represented by the same oppressors and the same abusers of those natural resources of the Western Sahara. So yes, indeed, I think when we're speaking about human rights, there's a distinguish between peace and justice. What is it? Oh, and is that why everyone's leaving? Okay, I don't have a problem. I can speak to myself as well, because my husband and I live in I'm kidding. But I just want to go to the fact that we need to see human rights abuses as withdrawal of humanitarian aid from the Gaza, withdrawal of humanitarian aid from whoever needs it, those who are living in poverty, and a human rights abuses when we sit down and do nothing. Human rights and democracy need to be defined in terms of the protocol of elections. But when it comes to humanitarian crisis, then the United Nations take a decision on a referendum as opposed to people who want their right to self-determination and autonomy. So I want to say the interventions, and these are very few and quick, is one, we must ask ourselves the relevance of the United Nations, of NATO, and the International Criminal Court. Is it really a court of justice? Is it a court that is serving honestly and truthfully the globe? And then, do we take what needs to be relevant in terms of the tribunals that have charged those that did not suit the intentions of those that have the veto powers of the United Nations? The opportunity to be served before the ICC or for their lives to be taken. I thank you very much.
Does anybody have, yeah, you guys are welcome to stay and ask any questions if you have any. Does anyone have any questions? We'll just take like a few and then we'll go.
I had a question.
Oh, right here, question.
Loud voice.
No, but it's for the
Oh yeah,
streaming,
for the streaming.
What I understand. I don't know if
Okay.
it's right, but
Just thank you for the presentation. I'm from Puerto Rico. Nice to meet you personally. I just can answer what is your, do you think is the role of peace education in this context that you share with us? That of course we do not have all the data, all the situations, the realities, that is like a movie, but worst. Just my question is, what do you think could be powerful and effective and empathic and environmentally lovely peace education? Thank you.
You understand?
Thank you very much, sir. Definitely, there is you see, that's why I started from the end in the 1900s, because I think that the role for peace education is fundamental, for respect in totality, but also in terms of understanding that peace comes with self-dignity and self-respect, self-ownership, self-sovereignty. I think that is ultimately where we start with the non-interference, when we can exercise the determination of our peace to the extent that we want to, with the capital that we own and have, and is not going to be at risk to be taken from us. So I believe that indeed, the role of peace in education within a democratic or an uncolonized state, and one that exists in a post-colonized state, remain the same, but have different degrees of implementation as opposed to one in an uncolonized state. Thank you very much. I hope I answered.
Yes, yes.
You're from Puerto Rico, you said? Well, then you know that there's been nonviolent peace movements that have created great victories in our cause. Vieques, for instance, the release of the political prisoners. We're the only nation that released 2 groups of political prisoners 20 years apart, but we were able to do the campaign to release 2 large groups of political prisoners. The stop against the mining of juntas and Utuado, the super duo. These have been great victories. And not recently, most recently we ousted a governor without firing one shot. We ousted a governor. Now, let me mind you that in the minds of the oppressor, there's always the other alternative. That if you don't deal with the peace movement, you have to deal with the armed movement. And Puerto Rico has a history of having armed struggle. But what I would suggest is, for the armed movement to be successful, all we need is a few good women and men. For the peace movement to be successful, you need mass movements. And in order for you to be to have mass movements, you have to be consistent, diligent, and you have to be very honest with your organizing. You have to respect the communities that you're organizing in, and you have to speak a language that they recognize. We can't go in there intellectualizing and bringing, libraries into these meetings. You have to speak a language that they understand, and you have to not go in there as a person already presenting the solution. You have to hear what they have to offer or what they have to tell you is the problem. Because I've made that mistake where I've gone and said, oh, I even went to Cuba one time and saw a school and said, oh man, maybe I can come back with some paint and paint the school. Then Fidel gave a speech that night, and it was almost like he was directed it straight at me, because he said, don't worry about the paint in our schools, worry about what we're teaching inside them. And I thought, I'm already short, but I almost disappeared, because I was imposing what I thought was a need on the people. And if you're going to be a good organizer, especially in the peace movement, because the peace movement, believe it or not, you're as much as frontline as the soldiers are. Sometimes my mother didn't know what the consequences of my activities were. Neither did my family, neither did my community, some in my community, and they suffered just as much and greater than I did while in prison. So keep that in mind, but celebrate the victories, but remember, it's a short-lived celebration because we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you very much. I want to take off from your point about education in schools to ask all the panelists, what do you think is the role of reforming the educational system in these countries to help the young to understand that they are not colored, black, Afrikaner, black or whatever, Indian, the divisions are not allowed to go unchallenged in the reform of the educational system so that we can come to a place of peace. Because in Haiti, what I saw was, after the fall of Duvalier, a chance of a new Haiti. But what I witnessed as someone who was there as part of a fact-finding mission was that the internal divisions, the wealthy elite, the colored, they were not really interested in the masses being part of a democratic, equal society. So the foreigners, the US couldn't do it without the collaboration of the internal supporters. And in South Africa, it's the internal divisions which persist, which keep the old system in place. So how do we move beyond a definition of the problem to the solution?
Thank you for that question. And I apologize in advance if I understood you wrong, but I'm gonna answer it as I understood it, and then we can clarify.
Oh. It's better with everything.
Praise you to God. Okay. So here's what I have to say to that. First, when it comes to these divisions, I think we need to understand the difference between like pride in ourselves and colorism, right? So I think you do have like a division of colorism that happens, and that needs to be discussed, and it needs to be taken out, right? Because that's not helpful, and it's just there to cause a division. However, I think that it is important for people of African descent to feel a connection to Africa and to feel a connection to their Africanness, right? And I don't think that takes away from us. I actually think that helps us, because it helps us to restructure kind of how we feel about ourselves and how we see ourselves. One of the things that used to happen when people were enslaved, when they first came to their new land, they would go through this process called seasoning. And what that process was to like strip you of your former identity, right? And to strip you of whatever communal binds that you had with that identity, your religion, your culture, all those things. So as people of African descent, we actually have managed to keep some of those things, even though we don't know that we've kept them. Now we can see how some of our dances, some of our food, some of our mannerisms come from our cultures that we had before enslavement. But I think like to do more work and to reach deeper into that connects us. As far as the elite in these countries, I can speak specifically for the elite in Haiti. They don't care about us, right? Because they only care about their money, they only care about their power, and that has nothing to do with Haiti. They see themselves as something else, and that is not something that we need to change. We just need to get them out of power, because they're not here for us. And actually, the idea that the US can't do anything because of them is untrue. The US keeps them propped up, right? Just the same way that we know that there are like all these other countries and all these like dictators that stay in power because they have the backing of the US. Let's take Gaddafi, for instance, because he was mentioned, right? I happen to not be against Gaddafi, but when it was like working for the US and for France and for whoever, he was in power. As soon as it wasn't working for them anymore, because he wanted to build like a Pan-Africanist situation in Africa, and unite the currency in Africa and do all these other projects, and it wasn't working for them, he died, right? So it's not to say that these people are in power and it's stopping advancement is actually not true. They're there to stop the advancement. They're there to act as vassals to keep the country where it is. And I feel like what we need is like another Haitian revolution to take out these elites and the rest of them.
I think the issue of Pan-Africanism is going to unify the world in terms of education and re-educating society. So if you want to know about how then do we reform education systems, and we go back to the history of civilization, we understand that civilization and in all of its magnanimity and its intricacy was able to be understood and create a system that worked in the continent for the world, which learned from the system, whether it was its numerology, its numerics, or whether it was its alphabet, or whether it was even being able to find something to write on and create from. And I think this is where people have dropped over the line of understanding Pan-Africanism to mean that it is exclusive. Because it is what created the basis for humanity. Thank you.
I think we just started off.
Hi. Exercise my voice here. Thanks. I just want to hear a little bit more about, maybe from other people too, the view of the African Union. And yeah, is that enough of a question? Or should it's a question. You brought it up, so you can, I think, elaborate better. Then I can
Elaborate.
Okay, so the view of the African Union on
the African Union. Okay, that's what you were referring to, the Pan-African
yes.
Based, organized through the African Union. Okay, right? And I think, as I understood, but I misheard something. But okay, you see that as a tool of colonization, or what you see is kind of to me, a very complicated relationship between the UN
and the AU.
The African Union, which I think is I'm guessing, because I'm only learning, like elite and leaders of the various countries that are trying to coordinate, maybe keeping the ICC away, and at the same time coordinating development, and at the same time not losing sovereignty. So I'm just curious what.
Okay, I'm gonna try and put that all into one. Okay, so the intention was to start with what was the intention of moving Pan-Africanism beyond being created outside of Africa, but with the intention of understanding what transpired at the Berlin Conference in 1884.
Is it what year is it?
1884.
1884?
Yes.
Okay.
For where there was you take this country and I'll take that one. So then you got the Francophone, and you got the Anglophone, and then you got the Portuguese-speaking states in Africa, etc. And what then did Pan-Africanism mean, emanating from before and through and post that process in 1963, where it was ultimately created as an OAU, which was then transformed. Now, my point, this is the point that you want to answer to. Okay, I think I get it now. So the issue that I raised, what would have been the reason for the dissolution of the OAU into the AU, which then immediately led to the death of Gaddafi? okay, and the arrest of Bashir. You see? Now, the point that I was making was that even though the intentions of the OAU were to correct colonization, its reformation into the AU caused susceptibilities. Because Morocco was not, withdrew as a member of the OAU and rejoined as a member of the AU. So it created its self-destruction, a path of self-destruction. So that is what I was talking about in perspective of this is where the OAU initially intended to create a United States of Africa and ended up now being separated on language lines, which is another issue in terms of reformation of education and the education system, is the language. In Cameroon, you've got a problem with Francophone Cameroon and then the English-speaking Cameroon who share the same space but are simply being agitated by France and then wanting to preserve English as a language. But there's no issue because they get to exercise their right to determination. But it is a right to who then owns the land, who owns the Amazonia. Okay? I hope that answers your question. Okay, we'll talk. All right.
Well, one final question. One of the things that I like to add to that is that if you look at the resources of Africa alone, imagine if the African countries were to actually unite, form their own currency. I mean, some of them are joining right now the BRICS, right? The BRICS proposal, and what that's going to do is that actually the U.S. dollar is going to decline, which will probably end the United States into forming another war somewhere because they need their dollar to be hegemonous. But what if these African countries, and I think that's what Gaddafi was trying to do when he was killed, he was trying to form a currency of Africa because it was based on something and not just based on publishing as many dollars as you can, as many $20 bills as you can from the mint. They were based on gold and they're based on minerals in the earth. So, we have a challenge. We have a challenge amongst within ourselves to maintain a cohesion, to maintain a solidified group that's advocating nonviolence and advocating peace around the world. But we have to stay forever vigilant and stay a step ahead. See where things are going internationally, and maybe we can prevent some of these wars. We can prevent some of these conflicts. Maybe we can add our grain of salt into unifying some of these people who are potentially become enemies. I think we have in our communities we have the same type of dilemma. We have to foresee some of these gang wars and maybe try to intervene and try to do some work. I remember in the 70s when I tried to organize gangs in Chicago, we had a thing called Brothers of Associated Nations of the Ghetto, organization BANG. That only lasted 2 weeks because we were trying to organize entities that did not want to leave their structure. So what we did was identify people within those organizations that were capable of leading that mentality. Just like we have to lead the colonized mentality, gang members have to lead that gang mentality. If you see the potential in someone, then those are the ones you want to start organizing first. And then maybe you pull them out, you save that life first, and they'll help you save someone else. That's my thought. Anybody else want to ask something? Appreciate you being here. Thank you. We've learned as much from you. We are interconnected.
Oh, here, okay. Okay, Rena.
Huh? You're gonna go get me. Yeah.